I I think this started. Okay. So I just finished part 8, chapters 15 and 16. So 2 more parts, 4 chapters left. I took like a 10-ish minute break just because I've been talking for 2 hours straight. So I want to give my throat some rest, like get up, walk around. Just like, I just took a little break. I still hadn't had an update on the boat when I stopped the last one, which was literally 10 minutes ago. But the moment I hit live on this, I actually just got a message. So we're not going under tomorrow. I have another day in Guam. And assuming that we don't go on Friday, I'm betting that means we're here till Monday. Just because of I'm assuming it's contractors doing all the work. And if the contractors can't finish it Friday for us to go, I just don't feel like we'll be going till Monday. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe we can go Saturday. I don't know. But I have at least one more day. So I am excited to get to see you. And I don't know, maybe play cribbage, just sit and watch the last This Is Us from the same spot while you're doing work, or just talk to you. I'm just excited to have another day with you. I think we're gonna go at some point, regardless. But I'm excited that I get to have another day with you, and it's not just, hey, you land, I'm gone, bye. But yeah, all the same, you are still 2 hours and 7 minutes from Denver. I will definitely be finishing the book at this rate before you get to Denver. Pretty much exactly as you get to Denver is my thought. Maybe like 20-ish minutes early. I could definitely finish it sooner if I literally just read fast. And I don't know. I think I could. It shouldn't be taking me an hour for 2 chapters, but it's the pace I've been going. It's a pace I'll just continue to go, I guess. But yeah, I get some more time. That's the news update as of this hour. It's a brief minute. Block that light. Oh my god, it gets worse. You know what? I'll just leave it like this. Maybe I should shut them. Oh, you know what? I can shut those lights off. I'm so stupid. Let me do that. You know what? I don't think that was honestly that bad. It's mainly the bed. Maybe I should unplug the bed. Let me play around. I'm trying to see how the lighting looks. Never mind. There is no plug for the above the bed lights that I have access to. I thought there might be because like before you left, there were a lot of lights flickering in here, like above this and behind the TV right here. I actually climbed the walls on this side by the desk and got above the TV and realized there was a plug there, so I unplugged the strips for the short-circuiting lights here. So I actually figured out how the lighting works for this like ceiling style lighting. It's pretty simple. It's super simple. It's just this like holiday strips basically, but it's hidden because they've built concaves over everything, like cliffs, like little cubbies that it can be hidden in, so you can't tell they're there. It's literally just really high-powered strips. It's very. I think you could do it really cheap. You just have to make sure you have plugs in these places. And some of them, like the one above the TV, they literally extended the plugs with like surge protectors, like extension cable. I think so. They have this on both sides of the room. They have the wall. It's like a 3-inch section of wall that puffs out with this wood. And I think the whole reason it exists is to hide the original cabling of this room. I think there's original wall sockets behind here. And they've literally just run on all of the wall sockets, the cabling, up so they can have the like glow effect of the lights being hidden around everything. The biggest cost of the lighting here, like the lighting here is actually very simple, I've come to realize. The biggest cost of the lighting is hiding it. They've done so much, like I think half of this room's building layout is hiding the lights, is what I've come to realize. It almost seems pointless. Like it's very beautiful. It's very pretty, aesthetically pleasing, however you want to put it. But they've actually cut down on the space a lot just so they can hide all of the lights. So I'm starting to question how nice it actually is. Yeah. Okay. But anyways, I've wasted 6 minutes, done nothing but stare at lights, talk about lights. You are, according to this map, you are literally off the coast of California right now. We're like, oh, I don't know, what's this distance? 100-mile distance for that. You're about 150 to 200 miles from the coast of California. You'll be breaking land while I talk to you. Probably in 20 minutes or less. Probably 15 minutes. So maybe by the time I finish the first chapter, you'll have broken land. But yeah. I love you. I'm really excited I get to spend another day with you. Can't wait to see you. I'll start reading. Where the Red Fern Grows, Chapter 17. Looking up the sky, Papa said, "That doesn't look good up there. I think we're in for a storm." The sky turned a dark gray. Fast-moving clouds were rolling through the heavens. Grandpa said, "Looks like we're going to get some wind, too." Scared and thinking everyone might want to stop hunting because of a few clouds, I said, "If a storm is brewing, it's a good night to hunt. All game stirs just before a storm. 30 minutes later, Papa said, "Listen." We stood still. A low moaning sound could be heard on the tops of tall sycamores. Grandpa said, "I was afraid of that. We're going to get some wind." We heard a rattling in the leaves and underbrush. It was beginning to sleet. The air turned cold and chilly. From far downriver, we heard the deep baying of a hound on a trail. It was old Dan. Seconds later, the rhythmic crying of little Ann could be heard. Swallowing the lump that had jumped in my throat, I whooped as loud as I could. The ground was turning white with sleep. The storm had really set in. We hurried along. I said to Papa, "If this keeps up, that old coon won't run long. He'll head for his den." "If it gets much worse," Grandpa said, "I know some coon hunters that won't be running very long. They'll be frozen too stiff to run." The judge asked if there was any danger of getting lost. "I don't know," Papa said. "It's all strange country to me." My dogs' voices sounded far away. I knew they were much closer than they sounded as they were downwind from us. Finding 3 large sycamores growing close together, we stopped on the leeward side. Papa shouted above the wind, "I don't know if we can take much more of this." "It is bad," Grandpa replied, "and it looks like it's going to get worse." "You can see over 15 feet now," the judge said. "You can't see over 15 feet now," the judge said. "Do you think we can find the buggy?" "I think we can find the buggy, all right," Papa said. I could no longer hear the voices of my dogs. This had me worried. I didn't want to leave them out in the storm. "Can anyone hear the hounds?" Grandpa asked. "I can't," Papa said. The judge spoke up. "Fellows, I think we'd better go in. There's no telling where they are. They may have crossed the river." Scared, knowing I had to do something, I said, "They're closer than you think. Probably treed by now. You can't hear them for this wind. I beg. Let's go a little further." There was no reply, and no one made a move to leave the shelter of the trees. Taking a few steps, I said, "I'll take the lead. Just follow me." "Billy, we couldn't find them," Papa said. "You can't see or hear a thing. We better start back for camp." "I think so too," the judge said. At this remark, I cried. I've been out in storms like this before, all by myself. I've never left my dogs in the woods, and I'm not going to now, even if I have to look for them by myself. No one answered. "Please, go just a little further," I begged. "I just know we'll hear them." Still no one spoke or made a move to go on. Stepping over to my father, I buried my face in his old Mackinac coat. Sobbing, I pleaded with him not to turn back. He patted my head. "Billy," he said, "a man could freeze to death in this storm, and besides, your dogs will give up and come on." "That's what has me worried," I cried. "They won't come in. They won't, Papa. Little Ann might, but old Dan, he'd die before he'd leave a coon in a tree." Papa was undecided. Making up his mind, he stepped away from the tree and said to the others, "I'm going on with him. You fellas coming and going back." He turned and followed me. Grandpa and the judge fell in behind them. By this time, the ground was covered with a thin white layer of sleet. We kept slipping and falling. I could hear Grandpa's mumbling and grumbling. The wind-driven sleet stung our skin like thousands of prickling needles. Strong gusts of wind growled and moaned through the tops of the tall timber. Once during a momentary lull of the storm, I thought I heard the baying of a hound. I told my father I thought I'd heard old Dan. "From which direction?" he asked. "From that way," I said, pointing to our left. We started on. A few minutes later, Papa stopped. He shouted at my grandfather. "Did you hear anything?" "No," Grandpa shouted back. "I can't hear anything in the storm." "I thought I did, but I'm not sure," the judge said. "Where is it coming from?" Papa asked. "Over that way," the judge said, pointing to our right. "That's the way it sounded to me," Papa said. At that moment, all of us heard the deep voice of old Dan. "It sounds as if they're close," Grandpa said. "Let's split up," said the judge. "Maybe one of us can find them." "No," Papa said. "It'd be easy to get lost in the storm." "I think they're more to the right of us," I said. "I do too," Papa said. We trudged on. Old Dan bawled again. The sound of his voice seemed to be all around us. "The way that wind is whipping the sound through this timber," the judge said. "We'd be lucky if we ever found them." Papa shouted over the roar of the wind. "We can't take much more of this. We'll freeze to death." The men were giving up. I felt the knot again as it crawled up in my throat. Salt water froze on my eyelashes. Kneeling down, I put my ear close to the icy ground in hopes I could hear my dogs. But I couldn't hear anything above the roar of the blizzard. Standing up, I peered this way and that. All I could see was a white wall of whirling sleet. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer and hoped for a miracle. We heard a sharp crack and a loud crashing noise. A large limb, torn from a tree by the strong wind, fell to the ground. The sharp crack of the limb gave me the idea. Shouting to my father, I said, "Shoot the gun. If my dogs are close enough to hear it, maybe little Ann will come to us." Papa didn't hesitate. Pointing the gun high over his head, he pulled the trigger. The sharp crack rang out into the teeth of the storm. We waited. Just when I had given up all hope and had sunk to the lowest depth of despair, out of the white wall of driving sleep, my little dog came to me. I knelt down and gathered her in my arms. Taking one of the lead ropes from my pocket, I tied it to her collar. I said, "Find him. Find him, little girl. Please find old Dan." Right then, I didn't care about coons, gold cups, or anything. All I wanted was my dogs. I don't know how she did it. Straight into the face of the storm she led us. Time after time, she would stop and turn her head this way and that. I knew she couldn't scent or see anything. Instinct alone was guiding her. Over a winding and twisting trail we followed. Coming out of the bottom, she led us into a thick canebrake. The tall stalk sheltered us from the storm. The whirring of the wind didn't seem as loud. Like ghostly figures, large trees loomed out of the almost solid mass. Falling and stumbling, we kept pushing on. Grandpa shouted, "Hold up a minute. I'm just about all in." We stopped. "Do you think that hound knows what she's doing?" the judge asked. "Maybe we're just running around in circles." Looking at me, Papa said, "I hope she does. Some of these canebrakes cover miles. If we get lost in here, we'll be in bad shape." Grandpa said, "I think we've gone too far. The last time I heard old Dan, he sounded quite close." "That was because the wind carried the sound," I said. The judge spoke up. "Fellows, no dog is worth the lives of 3 men. Now let's do the smart thing and get out of here while we can. Our clothes are wet. If we keep on wandering around this jungle, we'll freeze to death. It doesn't look like this blizzard is ever going to let up." I could hear the roar of the blizzard in the I could hear the roar of the blizzard back in the thick timber of the bottoms. 2 large limbs being rubbed together by the strong wind made a grinding, crackling sound. The tall, slender cane came around us and rattled and swayed. I could feel the silence closing in. I knew the judge's cold logic had its effect on my father and grandfather. The men had given up. There was no hope left for me. Kneeling down, I put my arms around little Ann. I felt the warm heat from her moist tongue caressing my ear. Closing my eyes, I said, "Please, Dan, bawl one more time. Just one more time." I waited for my plea to be answered. With its loud roaring, the north wind seemed to be laughing at us. All around, tall stalks of cane were weaving and dancing to the rattling rhythm of their knife-edged blades. My father tried to talk above the wind, but his words were lost in the storm. Just before another blast, clear as a foghorn on a stormy sea, old Dan's voice rang loud and clear. It seemed louder than the roar of the wind or the skeleton-like rustling of the tall swaying cane. I jumped to my feet. My heart did a complete flip-flop. The knot in my throat felt as big as an apple. I tried to whoop, but it was no use. Little Anne bawled and tugged on the rope. There was no mistake in the direction. We knew that little Anne had been right all along. Straight as an arrow, she led us to him. Old Anne was treed down in a deep gully. I slid off the bank and ran to him. His back was covered with a layer of frozen sleet. His frost-covered whiskers stood out straight as a porcupine quill's. I worked the wedges of ice from between his toes and scraped the sleet from his body with my hand. Little Anne came over and tried to wash his face. He didn't like it. Jerking loose from me, he ran over the tree, reared up on it, and started bawling. Hearing shouting from the bank above me, I looked up. I could dimly see Papa and the judge through the driving sleet. At first I thought they were shouting to me, but on peering closer I could see that they had their backs to me. Catching hold of some long stalks of cane that were hanging down from the steep bank, I pulled myself up. Papa shouted in my ear, "Something has happened to your grandfather." Turning to the judge, he said, "He was behind you. When was the last time you saw him?" "I don't know for sure," the judge said. "I guess it was back there when we heard the hound bawl." "Didn't you hear anything?" Papa asked. "Hear anything?" the judge exclaimed. "How could I hear anything in all that noise?" "I thought he was behind me all this time. I didn't miss him until we got here." I couldn't hold back the tears. My grandfather was lost and wandering in that white jungle of cane. Screaming for him, I started back. Papa caught me. He shouted, "Don't do that." I tried to tear away from him, but his grip on my arm was firm. "Shoot the gun," the judge said. Papa shot time after time. It was useless. We got no answer. Little Anne came up out of the washout. She stood and stared at me. Turning, she disappeared quickly in the thick cane. Minutes later, we heard her. It was a long, mournful cry. The only times I'd ever heard my little dog bawl like that was when she was baying at bright Ozark moon or when someone played a French harp or a fiddle close to her ear. She didn't stop until we reached her. Grandpa lay as he had fallen, face down in the light, icy sleet. His right foot was wedged in the fork of a broken box elder limb. When the ankle had twisted, the searing pain must have made him unconscious. Papa worked Grandpa's foot free and turned him over. I sat down and placed his head in my lap. While Papa and the judge massaged his arms and legs, I wiped the frozen sleep from his eyes and face. Behind my face and the iron gray hair, I cried and begged God not to let my grandfather die. "I think he's gone," the judge said. "I don't think so," Papa said. "He took a bad fall when that tree tripped him, but he hasn't been laying here long enough to be frozen. I think he's just unconscious." Papa lifted him to a sitting position and told the judge to start slapping his face. Grandpa moaned and moved his head. "He's coming around," Papa said. I asked Papa if we could get him back to the gully where old Dan was. I noticed there was very little wind there and we could build a fire. "That's the very place," he said. "We'll build a good fire and one of us can go for help." Papa and the judge made a seat by catching each other's wrists. They eased Grandpa between them. By the time we reached the washout, Grandpa was fully conscious again and was mumbling and grumbling. He couldn't see why they had to carry him like a baby. After easing him over the bank and down into the gully, we built a large fire. Papa took his knife and the boot from Grandpa's swollen foot. Grandpa grunted and groaned from the pain. I felt sorry for him, but there was nothing I could do but look on. Papa examined the foot. Shaking his head, he said, "Boy, that's a bad one. It's either broken or badly sprained. I'll go for some help." "Grandpa, now wait just a minute. I'm not going to let you go out in that blizzard by yourself. What if something happens to you? No one would know." "What time is it?" he asked. The judge looked at his watch. "It's almost 5 o'clock," he said. "It's not long till daylight," Grandpa said. "And if you want to go, you can see where you're going. Now help me get propped up against this bank. I'll be all right. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's numb now." "He's right," the judge said. "Think you can stand up?" Papa asked. Roared like a bear. "Sure I can stand it. It's nothing but a sprained ankle. I'm not going to die. Build that fire up a little more." While Papa and the judge made Grandpa comfortable, I carried wood for the fire. "There's no use standing around gawking at me," Grandpa said. "I'm all right. Get the coon out of that tree. That's what we came here for, isn't it?" Up until then, the coon hunting had practically been forgotten. The tree was about 30 feet from our fire. We walked over and took a good look at it for the first time. My dogs, seeing we were finally going to pay some attention to them, started bawling and running around the tree. Papa said, "It's not much of a tree, just an old box elder snag. There's not a limb on it." "I can't see any coon," said the judge. "Must be hollow." Papa beat on its side with an axe. It gave forth a loud booming sound. He said, "It's hollow, all right." He stepped back a few steps, scraped his feet on the slick ground for a good footing, and said, "Stand back and hold those hounds. I'm going to cut it down. We need some wood for our fire anyway." Squatting down between my dogs, I held onto their collars. Papa watched the old snag as it would fall away from our fire. Notched the old snag so it would fall away from our fire. As the heavy axe chewed its way onto the tree, it began to lean and crack. Pa stopped chopping. He said to the judge, "Come on and help me. I think we can push it over now." After much grunting and pushing, snapping and popping, it fell. I turned my dog's loose. On hitting the ground, the snag split and broke up. Goggle-eyed, I stood, rooted in my tracks, and watched 3 big coons roll out of the busted old trunk. One started up the washout, running between us and the fire. Old Dan caught him and the fight was on. The second coon headed down the washout. Little Ann caught him. Hearing a loud yell from Grandpa, I looked that way. Old Dan and the coon were fighting close to his feet. He was yelling and beating at them with his hat. The judge and Papa ran to help. The third coon started climbing up the steep bank close to me, but just before the top, his claws slipped in icy mud. Tumbling end over end, down he came. I grabbed up a stick and threw it at him. Growling him and showing his teeth, he started for me. I threw the fight to him, and then and there. Some 10 yards away, I looked back. He was climbing the bank. That time he made it and disappeared in the thick cane. Hearing a squall of pain from little Ann, I turned. The coon was really working her over. He had climbed up on her and was tearing and slashing. She couldn't shake him off. Grabbing a club from the ground, I ran to help her. Before he had killed our coon, old Dan came tearing in. We stood and watched the fight. When the coon was dead, Papa picked it up and we walked back to the fire. "How many coons were in that old snag?" Papa asked. "I saw 3," I said. "The one that got away climbed out over there." I pointed in the direction the coon had taken. I never should have pointed. My dogs turned as one and started bawling and clawing on their way up the steep bank. I shouted and scolded, but to no avail. They disappeared in the rattling cane. We stood still, listening to their voices. The sound died away in the roaring storm. Sitting down close to the fire, I buried my face in my arms and cried. I heard my judge say to my father, "This beats anything I've ever seen. My those dogs can read that boy's mind. He just pointed at that bank and away they went. I never saw anything like it. I can't understand some of the things they have done tonight. Hounds usually aren't that smart. If they were collies or some other breed of dog, it would be different. They're just red-bone hounds, hunting dogs." Papa said, "Yes, I know what you mean. I've seen them do things I couldn't understand. I've never heard of sounds that have ever had any affection for anyone, but these hounds are different. Did you know they won't hunt with anyone but him? Not even me?" Hearing my grandfather call my name, I went over and sat down by his side. Put his arm around me, he said, "I wouldn't worry about those dogs. They'll be all right. It's not long till daylight. Then you can go to them." I said, "Yes, but what if the coon crosses the river? My dogs will follow him. If they get wet, they could freeze to death." "Just have to wait and hope for the best," he said. "Now straighten up and quit that sniffling. Act like a coon hunter. You don't see me bawling and this old foot is painting me something awful." I felt better after my talk with Grandpa. "Come on, let's skin these coons." I got it. I got up to help him. After the skins were peeled from the carcasses, I had an idea. Holding one up close to the fire until it was warm, I took it over and wrapped it around Grandpa's foot. Chuckling, he said, "Boy, that feels good. Eat another skin the same way." I kept it up for the rest of the night. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. Oh, fuck. Just before dawn, the storm blew itself out with one last angry roar. It started snowing. A frozen silence settled over the canebrake. Back in the thick timber of the river bottoms, the sharp snapping of frozen limbs could be heard. The tall stalks of wild cane looked exhausted from the hellish night. They were dropping and bending from the weight of the frozen sleet. I climbed out of the deep gully and listened for my dogs. I couldn't hear them. Just as I started back down the bank, I heard something. I listened. Again, I heard the sound. Papa was watching me. "Can you hear the dogs?" he asked. "No, not the dogs," I said, "but I can hear something else." "What does it sound like?" he asked. "Like someone whooping?" I said. Papa and the judge hurried up the bank, where the sound again. It was coming from a different direction. "The first time I heard it," I said, "it was over that way." "It's the men from the camp," the judge said. "They're searching for us." We started whooping. The searchers answered. Their voices came from all directions. The first one to reach us was Mr. Kyle. He looked haggard and tired. He asked if everything was all right. "Yes, we're all right," Papa said. "But the old man has a bad ankle. Looks like we'll have to carry him out." Our team broke loose and came back to camp about midnight, Mr. Kyle said. "This really spooked us. We were sure something bad had happened. 25 of us have been searching since then." Several men climbed down the bank and went over to Grandpa. They looked at his ankle. One said, "I don't think it's broken, but it sure is a bad sprain." "You're in luck," another one said. "We have one of the best doctors in the state of Texas in our camp, Dr. Charlie Lathman. He'll have you fixed up in no time." "Yes," another said. "And if I know Charlie, he's probably got a small hospital with him." Back in the crowd, I heard another man say, "You mean that Lathman fellow, who owns those black and tan hounds, is a doctor?" Shoes, another said. One of the best. Mr. Kyle asked where my dogs were. I told him that they were treated somewhere. What do you mean, treated somewhere? He asked. Papa explained what had happened. With a wide-eyed look in his face, he said, Do you mean to tell me those hounds stayed with the tree in that blizzard? I nodded. Looking at me, he said, Son, I hope they have that coon treed, because you need that one to win the cup. Those two Walker hounds caught three before the storm came up. When it got bad, all the hunters came in. The judge spoke up. I'll always believe that those hounds knew that boy needed another coon to win. He said, If you fellas had seen some of the other things those dogs have done, you'd believe it too. One hunter walked over to the broken snag. 3 out of 1 tree, he said. No wonder, look here. That old snag was half full of leaves and grass. Why, it was a regular old den tree. Several of the men walked over. I heard one say, I've seen this happen before. Remember that big hunt on the Red River bottoms? When the 2 little beagle hounds treed 4 coons and an old hollow snag? They won the championship too. I wasn't there, but I remember reading about it, one said. Say, I don't see Benson, Mr. Kyle said. The men started looking at each other. He was searching farther downriver than the rest of us, one fellow said. Maybe he didn't hear us shouting. Some of the men climbed out of the gully. They started whooping. From the distance, we heard an answering shout. He hears us, someone said. He's coming. Everyone looked relieved. Mr. Benson struck the washout a little way above us. He was breathing hard as if he'd been running. He started talking as soon as he was within hearing distance. It scared me when I first saw them, he said. I didn't know what they were. They looked like white ghosts. I'd never seen anything like it. Hunter grabbed Mr. Benson by the shoulder, shaking him. Get a hold of yourself, man, he said. What are you talking about? Mr. Benson took a deep breath to control himself and started again in a much calmer voice. Those 2 hounds. He said, I found them. They're frozen solid. They're nothing but white ice from the tips of their noses to the end of their tails. Hearing Mr. Benson's words, I screamed and ran to my father. Everything started whirling around and around. I felt light as a feather. My knees buckled. I knew no more. I knew nothing more. Regaining consciousness, I opened my eyes and could dimly see the blurry images of the men around me. A hand was shaking me. I could hear my father's voice, but I couldn't understand his words. Little by little, the blackness faded away. My throat was dry and I was terribly thirsty. I asked for some water. Mr. Benson came over. He said, Son, I'm sorry, truly sorry. I didn't mean it that way. Your dogs are alive. I guess I was excited. I'm very sorry. I heard a deep voice say, That's a hell of a thing to do. Come running here saying the dogs are frozen solid. Mr. Benson said, I didn't mean it to sound that way. I said I'm sorry. What more do you want me to do? The deep voice growled again. I still think it was a hell of a thing for a man to do. Mr. Kyle took over. Now let's not have any more of this, he said. We have work to do. We've been standing here acting like a bunch of school kids. All this time the old man has been lying there suffering. A couple of you men cut 2 poles and make a stretcher to carry him. While the men were getting the poles, Papa heated the skins again and rewrapped Grandpa's foot. With the belts and long leather laces from their boots, the hunters made a stretcher. Very gently, they put Grandpa on it. Again, Mr. Kyle took command. Part of us will start for camp with him, he said. The others will go after the dogs. Here, take this gun, Papa said. I'll go with him. Looking at me, Mr. Kyle said, Come on, son. I want to see your hounds. Mr. Benson led the way. As soon as we get out of this cane, he said, we may be able to hear them. They have the coon tree and a big black gum tree. You're going to see a sight. Now I mean a sight. They've walked a ring around the tree clear down through the ice and snow. You can see the bare ground. Wonder why they did that, someone asked. I don't know, Mr. Benson replied. Unless they ran in that circle to keep from freezing to death, or to keep the coon in the tree. I figured I knew why my dogs were covered with ice. The coon had probably crossed the river, maybe several times. Old Dan would have followed him. They had come out of the river with their coats dripping wet, and the freezing blast of the blizzard had done the rest. Nearing the tree, we stopped and stared. You ever see anything like that, Mr. Benson asked. When I first saw them, I thought they were white wolves. My dogs hadn't seen us when we came up. They were trotting round and round. Just as Mr. Benson had said, we could see the path they had worn down through the ice and snow till the bare black earth was visible. Like ghostly white shadows, round and round they trotted. In a low voice, someone said, They know that if they stop, they'll freeze to death. It's unbelievable, said Mr. Kyle. Come on, we must do something quick. With a choking sob, I ran for my dogs. On hearing our approach, they sat down and started bawling treed. I noticed their voices didn't have that solid ring. Their ice-covered tails made a rattling sound as they swished this way and that on the ice ground. A large fire was built. Standing my dogs close to the warm heat, the gentle hands of the hunters went to work. With handkerchiefs and scarves heating, steaming hot, little by little, the ice was thawed from their bodies. If they had ever laid down, someone said, they would have frozen to death. They knew it, another said. That's why they kept running in that circle. What I can't understand is why they stayed with the tree, Mr. Benson said. I've seen hounds stay with the tree for a while, but not in the northern blizzard. Men, said Mr. Kyle. People have been trying to understand dogs ever since the beginning of time. One never knows what they'll do. You can read every day where a dog saved the life of a drowning child or laid down his life for his master. Some people call this loyalty. I don't. I may be wrong, but I call it love. The deepest kind of love. After these words were spoken, a thoughtful silence settled over the men. The mood was broken by the deep growling voice I had heard back in the washout. It's a shame that people all over the world can't have that kind of love in their hearts, he said. There would be no war, slaughter, or murder, no greed or selfishness. It would be the kind of a world that God wants us to have. A wonderful world. After all the ice was thawed from my dogs and the coats were dried out, I could see they were all right. I was happy again and felt good all over. One of the hunters said, "Do you think those hounds are thawed out enough to fight a coon?" "Sure. Just run 'em out of that tree," I said. At the crack of the gun, the coon ran far out on a big limb and stopped. Again, the hunter sprinkled him with a bird shot. This time he jumped. Hitting the ground, he crouched down. Old Dan made a lunge. Just as he reached him, the coon sprang straight up and came down on his head. Holding on with his claws, the coon sank his teeth in a long, tender ear. Old Dan was furious. He started turning in a circle, bawling with pain. Little Ann was trying hard to get a hold of the coon, but she couldn't. Because of his fast circling, old Dan's feet flew out from under him and he fell. This gave little Ann a chance. Darting in, her jaws closed on the back of the coon's neck. I knew the fight was over. Arriving back at camp, I saw all the tents had been taken down but ours. Hunter said, "Everyone was in a hurry to get up before another blizzard sets in." Papa told me to take my dogs into the tent, as Grandpa wanted to see them. I saw tears in my grandfather's eyes as he talked to them. His ankle was wrapped in bandages. His foot and toes were swollen to twice their normal size. They had turned a greenish-yellow cover. Placed my hand in his fur, I could feel the feverish heat. Dr. Latham came over. "Are you ready to go now?" he asked. Snorting and growling, Grandpa said, "I told you I wasn't going anywhere till I see the gold cup handed to this boy." Turning to face the crowd, Dr. Latham said, "Men, let's get this over. I want to get this man to town. That's one of the meanest sprains I've ever seen. It should be in a cast. But I don't have any plaster of Paris with me." The hunter had come by our tent collecting the jackpot money came up to me. Handing me the box, he said, "Here you are, son. There's over $300 in this box. It's all yours." Turning to the crowd, he said, "Fellows, I can always say this. On this hunt, I'd seen two of the finest little coon hounds I ever hoped to see." There was a roar of approval from the crowd. Looking down, I saw the box was almost full of money. I was shaking all over. I tried to say thanks, but it was only a whisper. Turning, I handed the box to my father. As the rough old hands closed around it, I saw a strange look come over his face. He turned and looked at my dogs. Some of the men started shouting, "Here it is." The crowd parted and the judge walked through. I saw the gleaming metal of the gold cup in his hand. After a short speech, he handed it to me, saying, "Son, this makes me very proud. It's a great honor to present you with this championship cup." The crowd exploded. The hunters' shouts were deafening. I didn't know from where the two silly old tears came from. They just squeezed their way out. One dropped on the smooth surface of the cup and splattered. I wiped it away with my sleeve. Turning to my dogs, I knelt down and showed the cup to them. Little Ann licked it. Old Dan sniffed one time, then turned his head away. The judge said, "Son, there's a place on the cup to engrave the name of your dogs. I can take it into Oklahoma City and have it done. Or you can have it done yourself. The engraving charge has already been paid by the association." Looking at the cup, it seemed that far down in the gleaming shadows I could see two wide blue eyes glued to a window pane. I knew that my little sister was watching the road and waiting for our return. Looking back at the judge, I said, "If you don't mind, I'll take it with me. My grandfather can send it in for me." Laughing, he said, "That's all right." Handing me a slip of paper, he said, "This is the address where you should send it." Grandpa said, "Now that that's settled, I'm ready to go to town." Turning to Papa, I said, "You have to bring the buggy. I wish you'd look after my stock. I know Grandma will want to go in with us, and there'll be no one there to feed them. Tell Bill Lowry to come up and take care of the store. You'll find the keys in the usual place." "We'll take care of everything," Papa said. "Don't worry about a thing. I don't intend to stop until we get back, because it looks like we're in for some more bad weather." I went over and kissed Grandpa goodbye. He pinched my cheek and whispered, "We'll teach these city slickers that they can't come up here and beat our dogs." I smiled. Grandpa was carried out and made comfortable in the back seat of Dr. Letham's car. I stood and watched as it wheezed and bounced its way out of sight. "While I'm harnessing the team," Papa said, "you take the tent back down and pack our gear." On the back seat of the buggy, I made a bed out of our bedclothes. Down on the floorboards, I fixed a nice place for my dogs. All through the night, the creaking wheels of our buggy moved on. Several times I woke up. My father had wrapped a tarp around himself. Reaching down, I could feel my dogs. They were warm and comfortable. Early the next morning, we stopped for breakfast. While Papa attended to the team, I turned my dogs loose and let them stretch. We made good time last night, Papa said. If everything goes right, we'll be home long before dark. Reaching Grandpa's store in the middle of the afternoon, Papa said, I'll put the team in the barn and feed the stock while you unload the buggy. Coming back from the barn, he said, in the morning I'll go over and tell Bill Lowry to come up and open the store. Looking around, he said, it snowed more here than it did where we were hunting. Feeling big and important, I said, I don't like the looks of this weather. We'd better be scooting for home. Papa laughed. Sure you're not in a hurry to get home to show off the gold cup, he asked. A smile was my only answer. 200 yards this side of our home, the road made a turn around a low foothill, shutting our house off from view. Papa said, you're going to see a scramble as soon as we round that bend. It was more of a stampede than a scramble. The little one came out first and all but tore the screen door from its hinges. The older girls passed her just beyond the gate. In her hurry, she slipped and fell face down in the snow. She started crying. The older girls ran up asking for the cup. Holding it high over my head, I said, now wait a minute. I've got another one for you too. I held the small silver cup out to them. While they were fighting over it, I ran to the little one. Picking her up, I brushed the snow from her long braided hair and her tear-stained face. I told her there was no use to cry. I brought the gold cup up to her, and no one else was going to get it. Reaching for the cup, she wrapped her small arms around it. Squeezing it up tight, she ran for the house to show it to Mama. Mama came out on the porch. She was just as excited as the girls were. She held out her arms. I ran to her. She hugged and kissed me. It's good to have you home again, she said. Look what I have, Mama, the little one cried. It's all mine. She held the golden cup up out in her two small hands. As Mama took the beautiful cup, she looked at me. She started to say something, but was interrupted by the cries from the other girls. We have one too, Mama, they cried. It's just as pretty as that one. It's not either, the little one piped in a defiant voice. It's not even as big as mine. 2 cups, Mama exclaimed. Did you win 2? Yes, Mama, I said. Little Ann won that one all by herself. The odd expression on my mother's face was wonderful to see. Holding a cup in each hand, she held them out in front of her. 2, she said. A gold one and a silver one. Who would have thought anything so wonderful could have happened to us? I'm so proud. So very proud. Handing the cups back to the girl, she walked over to Papa. After kissing him, she said, I just can't believe everything has happened. I'm so glad you went along. Did you enjoy yourself? With a smile on his face, Papa almost shouted, Enjoy myself? Why, I never had such a time in my life. His voice trailed off to a low calm. That is, except for one thing. Grandpa had a bad accent. Yes, I know, Mama said. One of Tom Logan's boys was at the store when they arrived. He came by and told Sal about it. The doctor said it wasn't as bad as it looked, and he was pretty sure Grandpa would be home in a few days. I was happy to hear this news, and could tell by the pleased look on my father's face he was glad to hear it too. On entering the house, Papa said, Oh, I almost forgot. He handed the box of money to Mama. What's this? She asked. Oh, it's just a little gift from old Dan and little Ann, Papa said. Mama opened the box. I saw the color drain from her face. Her hands started trembling. Turning her back to us, she walked over and set it on the mantel. A peaceful silence settled over the room. I could hear the clock ticking away. The fire in the fireplace crackled and popped. Turning from the mantel, Mama looked straight at us. Her lips were tightly pressed together to keep them from quivering. Walking slowly to Papa, she buried her face in his chest. I heard her say, Thank God my prayers have been answered. There was a celebration in our home that night. To me, it was like a second Christmas. Mama opened a jar of huckleberries and made a large cobbler. Papa went to the smokehouse and came back with a hickory-cured ham. We sat down to a feast of the ham, huge plates of fried potatoes, ham gravy, hot cornbread, fresh butter, and wild bee honey. During the course of the meal, the entire story of the championship hunt was told. Some by Papa, but mostly by me. Just when everything was so perfect and peaceful, an argument sprang up between the 2 oldest girls. It seemed that each wanted to claim the silver cup. Just when they were on the verge of sawing it in 2, so each would have her allotted share, Papa settled the squabble by giving the oldest one a silver dollar. Once again, peace and harmony was restored. That night, as I was preparing for bed, a light flashed by my window. Puzzled, I tiptoed over and peeked through the pane. It was Mama, carrying my lantern and 2 large plates heaped high with food. She was heading for the doghouse. Setting the light down on the ground in front of us, she called to my dogs. While they were eating, Mama did something I couldn't understand. She knelt down on her knees in prayer. After they had eaten their food, Mama started patting them. I could hear her voice, but couldn't make out her words. Whatever she was saying must have pleased them. Little Ann wiggled and twisted. Even old Dan wagged his long red tail, which was very unusual. But Pa came out. I saw him put his arm around Mama. Mama. Side by side, they stood for several minutes looking at my dogs. When they turned to enter the house, I saw Mama dab at her eyes with her apron. Lying in bed, staring into the darkness, I tried hard to figure out the strange actions of my parents. Why had Mama knelt in the prayer in front of my dogs? Why had she wept? I was running all the whys around in my mind when I heard them talking. I know, Papa said, but I think there's a way. I'm going to have a talk with Grandpa. I don't think that old foot of his is ever going to be the same again. He's going to need some help around the store. I knew they were talking about me, but I couldn't understand what they meant. Then I thought, why, that's it. They want me to help Grandpa. That would be all right with me. I could still hunt every night. Feeling smart, figuring out their conversation, I turned over and fell asleep. Chapter 19. That is the end of another recording. Alright. I'm going to end this one here. I will definitely only be doing one more of these because my throat is getting sore. I have talked up a storm doing this. Well, one more tonight because supposedly I'm still here. I don't know. Someone said we were staying. It wasn't my officer. But I haven't received word from anyone else. So I don't know what the fuck is going on. I don't know who the fuck Curtis is. But Curtis says we're not leaving. That's the person. Okay. I don't know what's going on. No one's talking. That's the honest answer. But anyways, this one is done. One more to do, and then the book is done. I am really excited to finish so I can surprise you when you get off the plane. I'm really excited to talk to you. I love you people.